So this is week number 3 in the series From This Day Forward. And today we're going to talk about marriage, and we're going to talk about divorce, and we're going to talk about what God has in store for each and every one of us if we're married or are someday going to be married. Now, as soon as I mention the subject of divorce, I'm going to guess at least there are a couple in the room or a few who right away, that's a sore subject for you because it's part of your past. Well, let me just tell you, it's part of my past as well. No, not with my wife and myself, but with my parents. When I was 15, my parents were divorced, and it had a huge impact on me, and it has continued for decades to have an impact, but not just on me, on my brothers and on our extended family and on his extended family. It's one of those things that we've had to work through. I have a brother who was divorced not once but twice and is now married for the 3rd time. So I understand from personal experience and from my professional experience as a pastor over many years walking through a very difficult thing with so many couples when they either came to the brink of divorce and were able to come away from that and save the relationship or ended up having to part ways. So I want to encourage you. Today's message is intended to help you focus on what's in front of you. We're not here to focus on what's behind you. From This Day Forward is the title of this series for a reason. We want to focus on where we're at, where we're headed, and what is best, not only for ourselves, but everybody else as well. And we're in this series unpacking this idea. Today is your present. It will soon be your past. It will show up in your future. It will show up in your future. And when it comes to marriage and divorce, certainly that's true. In my case, the decision my parents made and the decision that my brother has made certainly has impacted a lot of us, including me, over the years. What was made then in the present quickly became the past, but it kept showing up again and again in the future. By contrast, my wife's parents had the same kinds of challenges and difficulties in their relationship as my parents did, but they made decisions again and again to stick it out, to work it through, to make it somehow possible to go forward and improve the relationship so that they could enjoy one another and provide a stable and secure environment for their kids as they were growing up, and then as an example to them in the years that followed. And they came real close to 70 years married before they actually passed away. 7 decades of commitment till death do us part. That's the title of today's message, and those are the words that are often a part of marriage vows. I take you to be my lawfully wedded husband or wife, and it's, to have and to hold. We talked about that last week. If you were in the first gathering last week, you're probably wondering if I'm still winded and if I ever got the chainsaw started. Some of you weren't here last week, don't know what I'm referring to. You can check that message out along with any of our other messages on our website or on our app as well. But yes, I did get the chainsaw started and no, I'm not winded anymore. As a matter of fact, after you were all gone, I went out here just outside the door and it started on the 2nd pole. I tried it one more time right before I came on stage, started on the 1st pole, came out here, and during 2nd gathering, it started on, I think it was the 1st or 2nd pole. In other words, my experience was uniquely for all of you who were here last time at our 9:15 gathering. I have another prop, by the way. I just don't learn. I brought another prop with me today. We'll see how that goes, and I'll get to that in a minute. But my wife's parents' example had a ripple effect that lasted literally for all those decades, as did my parents' choice to call it quits. And I've had the opportunity now, all these years, to see the difference in her family dynamics and in her approach to our relationship and in my family's dynamics and my approach to our relationship. Remember last week we established this idea that God's will for marriage is one man and one woman for life. And before we go any further, I want us to understand that that's not God saying no to something. That's God saying yes to something that he intends to be so amazing. He intends marriage to be this wonderful relationship, this friendship, this intimate relationship between two people who are lifelong companions and provide not just love and encouragement, but security emotionally and psychologically and spiritually for each other. And he wants to bless it, and he wants to help every couple make the most of it because he knows the potential is staggering. And he wants people, he wants men and women to experience that and to understand that. That's the yes. But because that's so important, because that's so amazing and so attractive, God also says, hey, you need to approach it with this idea that divorce is not an option. Divorce is not an option. Now again, God's not saying, oh gosh, you're bad. If you get a divorce, then, shame on you. God's not trying to do that. In fact, there's a verse in the Old Testament where God says, I hate divorce. But it's not that he hates people who get divorced. He hates what divorce does to people. And I can speak from personal experience. I get why he hated the fact that my parents ended up not being able to make it work because of all the impact that it had, the ripple effect that went on for years and for decades following. But the idea is to approach marriage where divorce is not an option. See, we think of relationships often, as we're getting to know one another, falling in love with one another, and then making that decision to get married. We think of that as entering into a relationship. It's kind of like going in the front door of a house, right? You go in the front door and you have high expectations and you're thinking it's always going to be like this. And you don't realize it's not going to always be like that. You go in thinking the person you're saying I do to is never going to change. You don't realize that they are. Or you're going into the relationship trying to change them and you don't realize until later that changing them is really not going so well. But we go in that front door with starry-eyed, rose-colored glasses with this set of expectations. And then reality hits at some point, and we begin to face challenges. And then that's when those challenges come, that's when the love needs to be unconditional. I'm committed to you till death do us part. Yeah, we're going through something right now that's really hard. I don't like it. You don't like it. We're upset with each other. We're having trouble communicating. But divorce is not an option. We're in this for the long haul, till death do us part. I've done lots of weddings over the years, and it's interesting to me how I've watched the culture change. More and more as we go along, the marriage vows seem to have less and less meaning to a lot of people. I hope you're an exception to that. My wife and I have been married 44 years earlier this month, and we're in it for the long haul. When we approached our relationship, we said divorce is not an option. We're going to be like your parents, Cindy, not like my parents. We're going to not even consider divorce as a possible option, like a back door to the relationship. Hey, if this doesn't work out, if we don't get along, or if this is not what we were thinking it was going to be, then we could always go out the back door. No, we not only didn't have a back door, but we went in the front door, I think with as much as a young couple can, eyes wide open because of my experience, knowing that it wasn't going to be easy at times, but we were committed to it till death do us part. In other words, the vows actually were sincere on our part. Now, a lot of couples say, oh yeah, well, when we got married, or we're engaged, and when we do get married, it's coming up, or when I meet that special someone and I say I do, I'm gonna have unconditional love for them. Well, maybe, I hope so, but then again, it's important to be honest with yourself and deal with this statement here. If he or she ever, and then we'll talk about this blank, then I'm out. I've heard lots of couples say similar things to me at different times. It's like if he ever lies to me again, because there's been a series of serious lies, and I'm just done. So if he ever lies to me again, then I'm out. And a couple recently tell me that. Or she might say, if he ever cheats on me, then I'm out. Or if he ever looks at porn again, or she ever looks at porn again, then I'm out. Or if he ever spends money without asking me first, like he's done so many times, then I'm out. And if you can imagine there being anything in this blank in your relationship, then it's a pretty good indicator that the love is not unconditional yet. Because unconditional love says, no matter what ends up in this blank, I made a commitment till death do us part, and I'm standing by it, no matter what you do. Because the commitment doesn't depend on your behavior. It depends on my integrity. And that's the kind of love God has for us. Aren't you glad? I have had a great mother-in-law. She's gone to be with the Lord now. Last several years, we've missed her tremendously, and I think of her often, in part because I had such a great relationship with her. You know, you've heard all the mother-in-law jokes. Well, she was not the poster child for any of those mother-in-law jokes. In fact, quite the opposite. She from the very get-go, made points with me. She used to tell Cindy when we were first married, she says, if you and Craig ever get in an argument, don't call me because you'll just make me mad at him, and then you guys will go kiss and make up, and I'll still be mad at him, and I don't want to do that. So you just keep that to yourself. But she did say at one point, she did say to me, this is a true story, Craig, if you ever cheat on Cindy, I will show up at your house unexpectedly with knife in hand. And I took her seriously. Wonderful lady, very, very wonderful lady. Loved me dearly. We got along very well. But I did not want to cheat on Cindy for fear of my mother-in-law. So, from this day forward is the title of the series. And if you're in a relationship or you have divorce in your past, again, that's not our focus if you have divorce in your past. But what is it going to be from this day forward? Today and tomorrow and this week until death does cause you to separate, what's it going to be? Is it going to be unconditional love? Is it going to be a commitment you take to heart more than ever before? What is it going to be? And we're going to take a look at what God has to say about this subject. Jesus is having a conversation that we're going to look at in a moment, but I want to set up the conversation a little bit because he's actually asked a question by some of the religious people of his own day who had a debate among themselves about divorce. And basically the debate was this. It was, what are the rules? Like, when is it okay to get a divorce and when is it not? And I've heard Christ followers, church people, approach this subject that same way. And I would submit to you that's not even the right approach. That rather than that, it's more the idea of what is it that's so wonderful about marriage that God had in mind, that he set it up the way that he did and made it a lifelong commitment that I need to continue to discover and embrace and be a champion of. And so that's a whole different approach to this subject. But they were struggling with the rules because some people said, well, the rules are this way, and somebody else said the rules are that way. Somebody else said the rules are this way. And so some of the religious leadership comes to Jesus, and basically they want it settled. And in the process, they're hoping to trap him in saying something. They did regularly with Jesus what the media does so often with people today. They play the gotcha game. And the Pharisees are playing the gotcha game, and we pick up the story in Matthew 19, starting with verse 3. It says, some Pharisees came and tried to trap him with this question. It's like, this is what everybody's talking about right now, all the blog posts and social media comments. Well, anyway, whatever it was, the equivalent in that day. Should a man be allowed to divorce his wife? And here's the key phrase, for just any reason. For just any reason. It's like some say, well, yeah, only for this reason, but not for that reason. And some say, oh, for any reason. Should a man be allowed to divorce his wife for just any reason? And Jesus responds in verse 4. He says, haven't you read the scriptures? Jesus replied, they record that from the beginning, God made them male and female. And we'll stop right there. We looked at that last week, Genesis chapter 1. God established that there would be two genders. He made us male and female. He established the parameters and the dynamics of relationship between a man and a woman. And he said that a man would leave his mother and father, that he would cleave to his wife, that the two would become one, all of that in the very beginning. And Jesus is referring to Genesis chapter 1 and 2. And he's going to quote some of it. And he said, the next verse tells us, this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Now, this is a mysterious idea, this idea that the two become one, because we're not one person when we're married. My wife and I are two persons. We have two personalities, and we definitely have two different ways of thinking. One of us is right. One of us is right. Just leave it hang out there like that. But so in what sense are we one? Well, this is something that matters very much to God, that it was God's idea, and it's very important, and Jesus sheds a little bit of light on it in the next couple of verses. Here's what he says. Since they are no longer two, but one, let no one split apart what God has joined together. I think it's very important for us to understand that whatever this mysterious, wonderful bond between a husband and a wife is all about, and we've been saying right along in this series, it's a physical and emotional and psychological and spiritual bond. But whatever it is, it's the doing of God himself. In other words, it's not the preacher that joins two people together. It's not the justice of the peace. In other cultures where marriages were arranged, it's not the parents who were causing the two to become one. No, whatever it is that is so sacred and so special, so wonderful, so attractive, so amazing, is something that only God does. When God joins two people together at that level, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, and then ultimately physically, there's something about that is God's doing. Now, Jesus makes this point, and he says, because it's my work, I don't want anybody messing with it. Let no one split apart or separate what I've joined together. And then in verse 7, he says, the Pharisees, as they're listening, they say, so why then did Moses say in the law that a man could give his wife a written notice of divorce and send her away? Now, they ask this because that's actually in the law of Moses. You can find it in the book of Deuteronomy. And this provision was what they were debating. This is the reason for this conversation in the first place. There were different interpretations of what was meant, and they referred to it as Moses, but in fact, it's the Word of God. It's part of that first group of books, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and it was given by God to Moses to give to the people, and now they're debating, well, how does this work? What are the rules? What's the right way? What are the loopholes that we can exploit for our own self-interest? And Jesus replied, interestingly, in verse 8, he says, Moses permitted divorce only as a concession to your hard hearts, but it was not what God originally intended. In other words, because God loves you, because he understands that human nature is what it is, and because it's difficult, very difficult sometimes to keep commitments, certainly for a lifetime, there was a provision there, but it was not what God had originally intended. Because what he originally intended was something amazing and wonderful that could only happen in the security of a committed relationship, a lifelong friendship, where both parties are so committed that divorce is not even an option that's on the table. And in the context of that relationship, God could do the amazing things that he wants to do. Now, that's at one level, that's the message today. From this day forward, if you're married, make it your resolution, make it your determination, make it the purpose of your heart, and then express that to one another. Hey, if it was ever on the table before, no longer is it. Divorce is not an option. I know some couples come to a place where they feel a need to do a renewing of their marriage vows, maybe because of something they went through or just because of the passing of time. And they spend a lot of money and plan a big ceremony. And that's really not necessary. It's not bad if you want to do that. But I would encourage you to renew your wedding vows regularly in the context of a conversation that starts like this. Honey, I want you to know while you're eating breakfast or, driving in the car or spending some quality time somewhere, and just say, honey, I just want you to know I am committed to you for life. That divorce is not an option. I won't ever put it on the table. You can count on me to be there for you in the long haul. It's interesting. We did a little informal survey through Mirbu Online. A number of you participated in that. And one of the questions asked single people, regardless of how they are single, whether they've never been married, divorced, widowed, whatever the case, asked single people, what are their biggest concerns? And it was interesting. The number one concern of singles is the fear that the other person wouldn't be there for them in the long haul. And that speaks right to the very thing that I'm talking about, that God wants us to feel secure in the relationship, so secure that the amazing things that can happen as a result of two people loving each other that unconditionally can actually begin to be nurtured and fostered in that relationship. Now, that's the message. But let's just be honest here. I'm going to devote the rest of the time that we have to this, which I think is one of the most important aspects of this practical considerations. Like, great, Craig, sounds good. Hopefully you agree with what God says about marriage, and I certainly do. But let's be real. Just sheer human determination just doesn't cut it sometimes, right? I can say, yep, I've set my will. I won't ever put divorce on the table. I can't be talked into any other approach. This is who I am. This is what I'm about. And sometimes the exertion of our human will is just not enough. And I want to remind us all that it's God that we depend on, and it's Jesus that we look to and trust in for this and any other aspect of our relationship with him. Listen, I have told people for years, and it's true, that Cindy and I would not be married today if it wasn't for the commitment that Jesus has had all these years to our relationship. When our commitment has fallen short, his commitment was there and real, and it made the difference. We sense that God was pulling for us and helping us and trying to get us to do the things that we needed to do to get through those tough times that we've had over the years. And so his commitment is real. And I know that my relationship with Cindy is altogether to God's glory, to his credit, and to Cindy's. In fact, I was talking with my brother the other day, and I was telling him, hey, it's Jesus and Cindy that have tag teamed me all these years. That's the only reason we're still married after 44 years and have the relationship that we do. So I asked my staff, I said, so help me come up with a list of some practical things that people can do that'll help that commitment stick. I have to make the decision. And by the way, you've got to make the decision before the crisis comes. Far too often, people finally go to counselors or pastors or some other person to mentor them and help them when things have progressed so far that it's difficult to bring them back. Much more difficult than it would be if ahead of the crisis, before you get there, before things deteriorate, you make a decision to not only take divorce off the table as an option, but commit yourself to do the kinds of things that make for a great relationship. So I'm going to give you a few things I think that'll help. I talked about the back door, and some people are content just to lock the back door, but they keep the key handy, in their pocket. In case things change, they can always unlock the back door and exit the relationship. Some people, they'll bar the back door, or they just close it and don't lock it. But I want to encourage you to do something more drastic than that. And here, I just want you to not just close and lock the back door. I want you to eliminate it. Just call the contractor, have him take the door and the jamb out, frame it in, sheetrock it over like there was never a door there. Just if there's a back door of divorce in your relationship and you're thinking, you have to be honest with yourself, then eliminate that completely. And here's why. Because when quitting is not an option, you think differently about the relationship. That's why living together doesn't work. That's why just casual relationships don't work like marriage can work. Because you think differently about the relationship. It isn't till death do us part. But when it's death to death do us part, that's a whole different critter. That's a whole different, there's a whole different way of thinking about that. Let me illustrate. I don't have any tattoos. If you have tattoos, that's great. I don't have any axe to grind with regard to tattoos. There's two reasons I don't have any tattoos. One is I hate pain. And everybody I've ever talked to says it's painful, so it's like, yeah, count me out. Why would I do that to myself? But the other reason, and this is probably the bigger reason, is I realize that tattoos are intended to be permanent. That's why they use permanent ink. That's why they do it the way they do it. It's designed to be there until death do you part. Right? It's like, okay, well, what's so important to me that I'd want to put that on my skin, and later when my skin is wrinkly and old and sagging from where it used to be, that I'd still want to be looking at that. And I could never land on something that is like, yeah, that's that important to me that I want to put it on my body. Now, that's just me. Again, I'm not judging anybody else. If you've got tattoos, that's great. I've got some people that I know have some fabulous tattoos, and I enjoy looking at them. But I thought maybe it'd be helpful. This is my prop today. I thought it'd be helpful just to kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about. This is a tattoo gun. It actually works. So now I'm not yet a tattoo artist, but nobody starts out that way, right? The guys and the gals that are really good at doing tattoos, the real artists, had to practice on somebody. So I'm looking for a couple of volunteers that'd like to come up. Oh, you think I'm kidding? No, you'd like to come up and get a free tattoo. Maybe I should show you how real this is by starting on myself. Ow! Ow! Man, no. It's like if your hand went up, I'm sorry, I saw your hand over here. If your hand went up and you were willing to have me put a tattoo on you, you need to think again. There's no ink in that gun, and I have no idea what I'm doing. And any tattoo I put on you would be permanent. Till death do you part. And the idea of the permanence of tattoos is what slows me down. And when it comes to marriage, it should slow us down a little bit. Because we should approach marriage with this idea that quitting's not an option. So, yeah, I know some of you are thinking, oh, they can take tattoos away these days. Yeah, but you can kind of still see where it was, and it's not a perfect science. But anyway, but when you approach the relationship like, I'm going to put a tattoo on me, and it's going to be there for the rest of my life. When they do the viewing of my coffin, it'll be right there, for everybody to see, right? So I want to think about it more carefully. And when you approach marriage that way, or if you're already married, when you realize, okay, quitting's not an option, that's off the table, you will think differently about the relationship. You just will. I put those tattoos on that you wash off. It's like, I'll put those on all day long. That's no big deal, right? You think differently when you know it's permanent. You just approach it a whole different way. All right, so what are some practical things that you can do? Here's number one. Remember what attracted you to each other in the first place. Remember what attracted you to each other in the first place. And build on that. A great relationship is built on that. My wife and I have a Christ-centered relationship. And I've often said that I married my best friend and am still married to my best friend. And Jesus being at the center of our relationship and us having friendship first is the foundation and strength of our relationship, and we've built on that for 44 years. All the other stuff is a bonus. Remember what attracted you to each other in the first place. If you've forgotten, then read back through journals or diaries or have a conversation with each other where it's like, why did we get married again? Let's see. And just rekindle that. Maybe it was a shared hobby or a common interest or whatever it was. So remember, number two, be realistic about what starting over will be like. And this is more than just, hey, the grass on the other side isn't as green as you think it is. That's also true. The grass always looks greener. But that's not really, this is more than that. This is, hey, realize that you're going to have a whole learning curve all over again with this new person and their relatives and their families and their personality. And, so if you're thinking, well, I'm just going to throw all of this away that I am so vested in, we have all these years of history, and I'm just going to walk away from it, Be realistic. Don't kid yourself. Don't delude yourself about what starting over will be like. It's not all it's cracked up to be. Next one is think about the people that will be hurt by your decision to quit. I talked to a guy who was almost 50 years of age not long ago, and he told me about his parents who were getting a divorce at nearly 70. And he was crushed by it. See, it's not just, oh, well, we'll stay together while the kids are at home. That's what my dad told me. He says, yeah, I've only stayed with your mom because of you. I was the baby in the family. But now you're old enough to deal with this, and so I'm out. And he left. And what he wasn't thinking about is how that would actually going to hurt me and impact me and a whole lot of other people in the family. In fact, both my brothers who were out of the home at that point were devastated by the fact that my parents got divorced, our parents got divorced, and they weren't living at home and weren't dependent on that relationship day in and day out, but it was devastating to them. We don't usually think about who would be hurt by our decision to quit. Usually, when we get serious about entertaining the option to quit, we're just thinking about ourselves and our own needs. Next one, don't use divorce as a weapon, nor as a way to manipulate and threaten your spouse. Don't do that. Even if you don't mean it. Even if you're just saying it just to get their attention. Like if you don't start talking to me, if you don't start pulling your weight around here and doing your share of the chores, I'm out of here. I'll divorce you. If you ever text her again, I'm out. That kind of coercion and threatening behavior does not foster the kind of relationship. Rather, do this. Force yourself to talk honestly and deeply about the issues. And notice it says force yourself. Don't force the other person. You're going to talk to me and you're going to talk to me right now. So sit down. Like nobody responds to that well, right? Force yourself to talk honestly and deeply about the issues. You know, the honest truth is, when I saw that you'd texted her, it just stirred up all my insecurities inside. And I just, the thought of us not going on together and of her coming into this and ruining what we've got is just unacceptable to me. And I want it to be unacceptable to you. Is it? Can we talk about it? So that's a whole different thing than threatening, manipulating. Force yourself to talk honestly and deeply. See, we often advocate for brutal honesty, and there's a place for that. Just like, even if it's going to hurt them a little bit. We so often shy away from the things we need to talk about because we're afraid of hurting their feelings, of creating a dynamic in the relationship that we don't want or they don't want. We're afraid of rejection and all the other things that get in the way of honest communication. So you have to force yourself sometimes just to say, not only am I going to be honest, but I'm going to talk deeply about this. I'm going to explore with the person that I'm married to. I'm going to explore what's really going on inside of me. Not judge them, not point out all their faults and try to fix them. I'm going to work on me. And I'm going to do that in the context of some healthy and good communication. Now, some of you are saying, hey, that all sounds great. Those are good suggestions, Craig. But what if the person that I'm married to or I'm going to marry, what if that person just isn't interested in any of this kind of stuff? Well, Romans 12, verse 18 says this about that. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. That includes your spouse. That includes him or her. And it's all you can do is your part, right? It's not your job to change the person you're married to. It's not your job to point out their faults. It's not your job to be the moral police in their life. It's not your job to do all those things that God says he'll do if you'll stay out of his way. Your job is to work on you. In other words, to be the person you are with wants to be with. Be the person you are with wants to be with. Be that person, because that's all you can do anyway. And if both of you do that, guess what? You'll have a wonderful lifelong friendship and wonderful marriage relationship that becomes deeper and richer and more satisfying with every passing year. I know because I'm living it. And I know it's possible. Do we have a perfect relationship? No. Do we have problems? All the time. Do I end up in the doghouse about once a week on something or another? Yeah, I do. But that's on me. That's not on Cindy. But we have the relationship we do because we have worked at it and trusted God. And God has been committed to us. And by His grace, we have made it as far as we have. And by His grace, we'll make it until death do us part. Let's pray.